So I got back to my home city, Rotterdam. I invested in one of the incubators here called Blue City. And that's when I realized there was actually so much entrepreneurship happening, but we were just not telling the story.
Welcome to the Startup Passport by Frontwalker. Today we are joined by Lars Crama. Thank you very much for joining. When trying to introduce you, there's always a little bit of a situation because amongst other things, you're the founding father of Upstream Festival. You're the member of the supervisory board of Erasmus Enterprise, member of advisory board of Superconnectors. You work for the municipality. You're chairman of the international, or as a chairman of the international advisory board. So when you introduce yourself, how do you introduce yourself?
It's hard. I think I'm a super connector in most cases, but I'm a dad first and foremost. So that's the most important part of my work. But super connecting ideas with capital, with partners. That's what I've been doing for many years now. But currently I'm the CEO of InnovationQuarter. And that is the most active and prominent investor in the South Holland region with about 320 million in capital available.
And you played quite a vital part in building the entrepreneurial ecosystem in Rotterdam. You were very involved in that. I think, let's say, roughly about 10 years ago, you were working in Amsterdam. And there you were also working in the entrepreneurship field, but also in different countries and building that in different countries. So what led you in the end to coming to Rotterdam, focusing on Rotterdam, and then like building what we know now as the entrepreneurial ecosystem here?
No, that's a good question, and I get that often. And I think for me, the split in my career was coming from building a scale-up myself in Rotterdam. So we grew from 25 to 250 people in 10 years. The company was acquired. I did an American company, brought it to Europe, and that's when I realized I want to be involved in startup creation, creating ecosystems and really making sure that good ideas find their way to market. And indeed started in Amsterdam. I participated in InnoLeaps, which was a corporate venturing advisory firm. And soon realized that everybody was looking at Amsterdam, as obviously most investments were in Amsterdam. Most companies seemed to be there. But me, coming originally from Rotterdam, I wanted to see what was happening here. And so I got back to my home city, Rotterdam. I invested in one of the incubators here called Blue City. And that's when I realized there was actually so much entrepreneurship happening, but we were just not telling the story. So that's when I think around 2019, the city of Rotterdam asked, what do you think about the startup ecosystem in Rotterdam? And I said, well, do you have a minute? Because I think there's an opportunity here. And what we saw was that actually per capita, Rotterdam was not doing much less than Amsterdam, right? So you had pretty much the same amount of startups. And I think what was most interesting is that the startups here were focusing on what we call transition topics. So the serious topics that tackle challenges in society, whether it's energy transition, whether it's building the future of compute, in health, those kind of big themes really set Rotterdam and the ecosystem apart. And then one thing on top of that is 10 kilometers from the city, there is the best tech university in the Netherlands and one of the best in Europe, which is Delft. And I think that connection really drew me to this region to see how we can take the tech talent from Delft, combine it with the entrepreneurial spirit, the can-do mentality of Rotterdam, and see how we can help companies grow.
And what do you think was the biggest change from back then compared to now? Because you said, well, the entrepreneurial ecosystem or entrepreneurship existed, but it was maybe just not like spoken enough about or enough like visible to the outside. So do you think a lot has changed within the entrepreneurial ecosystem, or do you think it's just more visible now? They're more loud?
I think both. So I think if you take that 10-year period, we've definitely seen growth in number of startups. We've seen the growth in number of scale-ups for sure. But I think also it's been more connected. So I think depending on what numbers you look at, there's roughly 3,500 startups in this region, of which about 10% is the ones that are really scaling up. And then the 1% of that obviously is becoming the next unicorn. And I think in 2 weeks from now, there'll be an announcement of a new unicorn in Rotterdam. So yes, those numbers have, I think, evolved and have grown. I think what's most important is that we've seen the startup to scale-up ratio develop, because that is actually the biggest challenge in an ecosystem. How do you get those ideas to scale? So I think that's the metric that we've been focusing on. And the other part is connecting. So this city, you have a great port, smartest port of Europe, and one of the biggest ports. You have a great medical center. But in the city, there's a lot happening on AI, on digital. And I think the challenge before was that some of these parts of the ecosystem were thinking in silos. And I think over the past 10 years, you really see that these parties and players have really come together with one goal, getting those ideas to scale. And I think that's changed quite a bit. And I think in ecosystem development, there's 4 stages of an ecosystem. So the first one is really where you have the first activity. The second stage is where you actually start creating new leaders. And the third stage, and I think that's the stage that Rotterdam is now getting in, is where you see some big exits reinvesting their money into the ecosystem, and that attracts foreigners as well. So I think we've moved to that stage. I would say Rotterdam has moved from stage 2 to stage 3 in the past 10 years.
And now talking about founders, because you helped about like over 1,500 companies during your time here to help them grow. And from a founder perspective, you're someone who says the advice, well, focus on one thing is not always the most helpful, or at least for you was differently, because you said for you a lot of good things happened when you focus on the intersection of different things.
Yeah. Yeah, so and I'm always careful with this advice, because I think as a founder, you do need to focus on one mission that you're following. And for me, my personal mission was to help great ideas grow to scale. And for me, it meant I needed to do multiple things. I think, yes, founders need to obviously, hocus pocus focus. So if you don't have full-time or more than full-time focus on your mission, then it's going to be super hard, because there's somebody else who probably spends more time. But that being said, I think particularly in these transitional startups and scale-ups, you do need to look what is happening in other areas. And particularly when it comes to innovation that crosses sectors. If you look in the medical space, for instance, the overlap between AI and medical is a super interesting one. So don't just stay in your AI bubble. Don't just stay in your medical bubble. But see how you can combine them. So by that definition, look around, talk to people with different perspectives. And also spend time there to figure out where you can play to win.
And next to the idea itself, from your experience, what do you think makes up a good entrepreneur? Of course, very, very much, very, very broad question, because it really depends on the context. But what do you think when you look at someone, when you talk to someone? What are things where you can where you maybe have the vision? Okay, with this guy, with this girl, it could work out.
Yeah. If I had to mention one specific thing that I think a good entrepreneur has, it's the term of grit, which is roughly passion times perseverance. So are you really passionate about solving whatever problem you're solving? Are you really in love with the problem? But then you also have the perseverance to actually push through, because you're going to have a lot of hurdles to go through. So for me, that grit is the one unique thing that I look for in founders, and also when we invest in companies, that's what we really look for. But I think a second thing that is often overlooked when it comes to good founders is, yes, you have to be a bit stubborn. So you have to have your own opinion. But I think founders that don't listen to feedback, that's a red flag. So I think as a founder, you need to follow your vision and go that way, but listen to feedback and listen to other people who've done it before and see how you can use that. So I think that for me would be the second thing we look at. When we work with companies, we give them feedback and we see how they process that feedback. So grit on one hand is number one, but then being able to incorporate feedback, I think, is number two.
And well, we still have some what we call them quick fire questions for you.
Oh wow!
These are mostly they're two this or that questions, and then finish the sentence.
Okay.
First question for you, especially being an advisor or being an entrepreneur yourself.
Entrepreneur myself.
Startup or scale up?
Scale up.
What is a common misconception about entrepreneurship?
That is fun, shit, and giggles. No, I mean, that is a misconception. It's hard work, right? If you, I think any entrepreneur knows that it's quite often an uphill battle. And I think if you knew beforehand what you were getting into, you probably would have said no. So I think that's something not many people realize about entrepreneurship.
What about you, from your experience? Now that you know what you went through, would you do it again?
Yes. Well, actually, so yes.
Yes, but
I think there's some things I would just not have started because I know how they ended, right? So I tried to write actually I'm still trying to create a museum of failed ideas. There's a few startups I tried myself and completely failed, or also investments I did. But that gave me a lot of learnings and ammunition for later things. So yes, maybe I would not do those things, but I would then leave those learnings on the table. Yeah.
As the founding father of Upstream Festival, the fact that Upstream is going independent of Up Rotterdam is
fantastic. It's the way it was intended to be.
And the last question: when I retire, the entrepreneurial ecosystem in Rotterdam
is making it happen.
It's making it happen, just like the slogan of the
city.
Like
the slogan of the city, and I think I already see it. I'm born, raised Rotterdammer, but I've always worked in many locations in the world. So I lived in Shanghai in China, I lived in South Africa, I lived in London, but coming back here, I'm really passionate about this ecosystem, and I think the make it happen mentality is let's roll up our sleeves, let's do stuff together, and let's move forward. And I hope that always stays in this ecosystem, and people really doing it together. And what the interesting thing is, you mentioned Upstream going independent. We always hoped that would be, because that would mean that entrepreneurs actually take it over and want to take it further. And I think it's a good example that there were a few early believers that now have invested their own money into the future of Upstream. And I think that's part of the giving back mentality that this city is well known for.
Thank you for being so active in the entrepreneurial ecosystem in Rotterdam, and also for sharing those insights and joining the podcast today. Lars Crama, thank you very much.
Perfect. Well done.